The smell of antiseptic never really leaves you. After 18 months working as a traveling nurse in a level I trauma center in Anchorage, Alaska, I had become so used to it that I stopped noticing it on my skin, in my hair, embedded in every jacket I owned. My colleagues joked that I probably dreamed in sterile blue and beeping monitors. Maybe they were right. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old, and I had spent the last year and a half doing what I told myself was noble, saving lives at the edge of the continent while my real life waited somewhere back in Tennessee. I video called my Nan every Sunday without fail. Her face on that small screen, framed by the yellow curtains she had sewn herself 40 years ago, was the one constant thing in my world of rotating shift schedules and emergency pages. Then one Sunday, she didn't pick up. I told myself it was nothing. She sometimes fell asleep early. She sometimes forgot to charge her tablet. I called again that evening. Then again the next morning before my shift. Voicemail each time, her gentle voice asking me to leave a message, the same recording she had never bothered to change in 6 years. I texted my brother, Daniel. He was 34, lived 40 minutes from Nan's house in Clarksville, and had appointed himself the family's unofficial manager of everything since our grandfather passed 2 years ago. Have you checked on Nan? She's not answering. He replied 4 hours later. She's fine, probably napping. You know how she is. I did know how she was. She was 78 years old with congestive heart failure, mild diabetes, and a stubborn streak that had outlasted 2 husbands and 3 decades of hard Tennessee winters. She was not the kind of woman who just went quiet. I called again that night. Nothing. I called the neighbor across the street, Mrs. Patterson, who was 80 herself but sharper than anyone I had ever met. Mrs. Patterson said she hadn't seen Nan's kitchen light come on in 2 days. She said Nan's car hadn't moved. She said the mail was piling up in the box by the front gate. I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of my bed in my Anchorage apartment for approximately 45 seconds. Then I opened my laptop and booked the first available flight home. It left at 6 the next morning. I called the charge nurse on my unit, explained there was a family emergency, and packed a bag in the dark. I did not call Daniel. Something I had learned in trauma nursing: when a patient's condition is unclear, you go assess it yourself. You don't send someone else and trust their interpretation. You go, you see, you decide. Whatever was happening with Nan, I wanted to see it with my own eyes before anyone had the chance to explain it away. The flight from Anchorage to Nashville with a connection in Seattle took 11 hours. I spent most of it staring at the window, running through clinical assessments in my head the way I did for patients. Worst case, best case, most likely case. Worst case was the one I kept returning to. I knew what happened to elderly women with heart conditions when they were left alone, and something went wrong. I had coded enough of them on my unit to understand exactly how fast it could happen and how little warning it gave. I landed in Nashville at 7 in the evening, rented a car, and drove straight to Clarksville without stopping. Nan's house sat at the end of a quiet residential street lined with oak trees that had been there longer than any of the houses. It was a white Craftsman with green shutters and a front porch where she kept 2 rocking chairs even though she hadn't used them in years. My grandfather had built those chairs by hand. He built a lot of things by hand, including, I would later discover, certain protections that would matter enormously before this story was over. The house was dark. Every window. The porch light that Nan kept on from dusk every single night of her life was off. I sat in the rental car for a moment, looking at that dark porch, and felt something cold settle into the center of my chest that had nothing to do with the November air. I had a key. I had always had a key. Even when I moved to Alaska, Nan had pressed her spare into my palm and said, "This house is always yours to come home to, baby girl." The front door opened into the hallway, and the smell hit me before my hand found the light switch. Not death. I want to be clear about that because I know how to recognize that particular smell, and it was not that. It was something more like neglect. Stale air. Unwashed dishes. A faint sweetness underneath that made the clinical part of my brain immediately think. Elevated blood glucose. Nan? My voice came out steadier than I felt. A sound from the back of the house, small and weak, but there. I found her in her bedroom. She was in bed, which was where she had apparently been for at least 2 days based on everything around her. The glass on her nightstand was empty. The pill organizer on her dresser, the one I had set up myself during my last visit, color-coded by day, showed that she had missed her medications for Wednesday and Thursday. It was now Friday night. She was conscious. That was the first thing I checked. Her eyes found my face and something moved through them. Relief, and something that looked like it had been waiting a long time to feel relieved. "Claire," she said. Her voice was like paper. I went into clinical mode instantly, which is the only mode I have when someone I love is in danger. I checked her pulse. Weak and irregular. Classic heart failure decompensation. Her ankles were swollen badly. Her lips had a faint bluish tinge in the lamplight. Her skin was cool and dry, which told me she was dehydrated. "I'm here, Nan. I'm right here." I was already reaching for my phone to call 911. "How long have you been in bed?" She thought about it. "Since Tuesday," she said. "Maybe Monday night. I fell in the bathroom and I couldn't get back up on my own." Monday night. It was Friday. She had been alone in that room, unable to get up for nearly 4 days. I kept my voice completely calm because she was watching my face and I was not going to let her see what I was feeling. "Did you call anyone?" "I called Daniel," she said. "He said he'd come by." He had not come by. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. I rode with her, holding her hand, telling her about Alaska in a cheerful voice that I pulled from somewhere I didn't know I had. I told her about the way the light looked at 2 in the morning in summer, the color of it, golden and strange. I told her about the moose I had seen outside the hospital entrance last September. I told her she was going to be fine, and I made myself believe it because she needed me to. In the emergency department waiting room. They made me wait even after I identified myself as a nurse, which is always the part that nearly breaks me. I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. Background noise behind him. Music, the particular echo of a large indoor space. "Hey," he said. "What's up? Where are you right now?" A pause. "Why?" "Daniel, where are you?" "Nashville. Lisa's cousin is getting married this weekend. We came down for Nan is in the emergency room." I said it flat and factual. She has been alone in her house since Monday. She fell and couldn't get up. She missed 4 days of cardiac medication. She's being assessed for decompensated heart failure right now. The silence on his end lasted long enough that I pulled the phone away from my ear to check the call was still connected. "Is she going to be okay?" he finally said. "I don't know yet." I paused. "I need you to come to the hospital. Tonight?" "Claire, we're in the middle of a rehearsal dinner." I hung up. I sat in that waiting room for 3 hours. A doctor came out to update me twice. They were stabilizing her with IV diuretics. Her heart rhythm was irregular, but responding. She was dehydrated, but her labs were, considering everything, better than they had a right to be. I sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights, and I let myself feel, for approximately 5 minutes, every single thing I had been holding back since I walked into that dark house. Then I put it away, because feeling it was not useful right now, and I needed to be useful. Daniel arrived at 11:30. He was wearing a blazer over a dress shirt which told me he had come directly from the rehearsal dinner. His wife Lisa stood slightly behind him with the expression of a woman who had been told a version of events she was uncertain about. "They won't let us back," he said when he saw me. "She's still being stabilized. They'll update us soon." He sat down 2 chairs away from me. "You flew in from Alaska." "Yes, you could have just called me. I would have checked on her." I looked at him for a long moment. He was my older brother. I had grown up following him around the backyard, had looked up to him for most of my childhood. I was trying very hard right now to hold on to that history and use it to temper what I was feeling. "She called you, Daniel," I said quietly. "She told me she called you and he said you'd come by." "I was going to." "She was on the floor," I said. "She was on the floor and she couldn't get up and she called you and you did not come." He didn't have an answer for that. In the days that followed, as Nan stabilized and began to improve, her color returning, her voice strengthening, the fluid clearing from her lungs, I was at the hospital every day. I also, because I am someone who learned early that crisis tends to reveal hidden problems rather than create them, started paying attention to other things. The first thing I noticed was a voicemail on Nan's home phone from her prescription delivery service, dated 6 weeks ago, saying that her account was showing an overdue balance and her upcoming delivery had been placed on hold. I had set up that service myself. It ran on autopay from the household account my grandfather had established for Nan's living expenses. The account my grandfather had established. That was important. I started asking questions carefully. The pharmacist told me the autopay had been canceled 8 weeks ago. The home health aide company that sent someone twice a week told me their last payment had bounced in September and they had suspended service. The woman who had been cleaning Nan's house once a month said she hadn't been there since August because Daniel had called and told her Nan's budget had been reduced and her services were no longer needed. August. 4 months ago. I sat at Nan's kitchen table with a yellow notepad and wrote down a timeline. I am a nurse. I document things. It is how I think through problems. Carefully, sequentially, without letting emotion contaminate the record. August, cleaning service terminated by Daniel. September, home health aid payments stopped. October, prescription delivery autopay canceled. November, Nan falls, lies alone for 4 days. I thought about the household account. My grandfather had been meticulous about finances. He had been an accountant for 30 years before he retired, and he had spent the last decade of his life arranging things to make sure Nan would be taken care of after he was gone. I had been present for some of those conversations. I remembered him sitting at the same kitchen table, talking to Nan in a low, serious voice about trusts and accounts and what would happen. I remembered him saying, more than once, that he did not want to leave things to chance, that he believed in backups. Nan came home after 8 days in the hospital. I had taken emergency family leave from my position in Alaska. I moved into the guest room and took over her medications, her appointments, her grocery orders, everything. On her 3rd day home, sitting in the living room with afternoon light coming through the windows, I asked her gently about the household account. She looked at her hands in her lap. Daniel said he was managing it, she said. After your grandfather died, he said it would be easier if he handled the finances. He had me sign some papers. What kind of papers? I don't know, baby. There were a lot of them. He explained them, but she paused. I trusted him. That night I called my grandfather's attorney. His name was Mr. Hendricks, and he had been handling my family's legal affairs since before I was born. I had his number because my grandfather had given it to me years ago with the same quiet seriousness he applied to everything important. In case you ever need it, he had said. In case something comes up and you need to ask questions. Mr. Hendricks agreed to meet with me the following morning. His office was downtown, small and lined with the kind of organized bookshelves that made you feel immediately that you were dealing with someone who did not lose things. He was in his late 60s with a deliberate way of speaking that I found deeply reassuring under the circumstances. I told him what I had found. The canceled services, the timeline, the papers Nan had signed. He listened without interrupting. Then he folded his hands on his desk and looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Your grandfather, he said, was one of the most careful men I have ever worked with in 40 years of practice. He paused. He was also, if I may say so, a man who understood people very clearly, including the people in his own family. He opened a drawer and removed a folder. When we finalized his estate plan 2 years ago, Mr. Hendricks continued, he included several provisions that were somewhat unusual. He was specific about why he wanted them. He set the folder on the desk between us. One of those provisions relates directly to what you've described to me today. My grandfather had established Nan's living expenses through a protected trust, not a simple joint account. The trustee of that trust was not Daniel. It was Mr. Hendricks's firm. Any changes to the trust's disbursements required approval from the trustee, meaning that Daniel, regardless of whatever papers Nan had signed, had no legal authority to cancel the services or redirect the funds, which meant the money had not been legally redirected, which meant it had gone somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. Mr. Hendricks had already noticed irregularities when the trust's quarterly review came due in October. He had sent a certified letter to Daniel. It had gone unanswered. I was preparing to take further action, he said, when you called me this morning. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, a city bus went by on the street below. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang twice and stopped. How much? I asked. He told me the number. It was not small. Over 14 months, the amount diverted from accounts that were linked to but distinct from the protected trust, accounts Nan had been convinced to grant Daniel access to, was just over $190,000. I drove home slowly. I sat in Nan's driveway for a while before going inside. She was in the kitchen when I came in, moving carefully between the counter and the stove, attempting to make the cornbread she had been making since before my mother was born. I watched her for a moment from the doorway. The way she moved, deliberate and a little fragile but still herself, still the woman who had taught me to bake and to read and to stand up straight and mean it. She had lain on her bedroom floor for 4 days. I helped her with the cornbread. We ate dinner together and I told her about a funny patient I'd had in Alaska, a fisherman who had come in with a hook in a location I could not describe at the dinner table, and she laughed, really laughed, for the first time since I'd been home. Afterward, I told her as gently as I knew how that there were some financial matters that needed to be sorted out, and that Mr. Hendricks was going to help us, and that she didn't need to worry. "Is it bad?" she asked. "It's fixable," I said, which was true, and also more merciful than the full answer. What followed over the next 6 weeks was not quick or simple, because nothing involving estate law and financial forensics ever is. Mr. Hendricks filed for a full accounting of every account connected to Nan's estate. A forensic accountant was brought in. Daniel, who had apparently been anticipating none of this, first denied everything, then claimed Nan had authorized all of it, then stopped returning calls and hired his own attorney. But my grandfather had been careful. He had been so careful. The trust documents were airtight. The protected disbursements had never been touched. That money was exactly where it was supposed to be, safeguarding Nan's long-term care. What Daniel had accessed were the secondary accounts, the ones my grandfather had set up for household expenses, and which he had, according to Mr. Hendricks, always known were the more vulnerable ones. And so my grandfather had done something that I only learned about during this process, something that made me sit in Mr. Hendricks's office and press my fingers against my eyes for a moment, because it was so perfectly, quietly him. He had installed a small recording device on the home computer where Nan managed her accounts. Not to spy on Nan, she knew about it and had forgotten it was there. He had installed it because he wanted a record in case anyone ever tried to manipulate her into authorizing transactions she didn't understand. Over the 14 months after his death, that device had recorded every conversation Daniel had with Nan about her finances, every explanation of why she needed to sign this form, every reassurance that this was just a formality, every quiet insistence that Grandpa would have wanted this. The recordings were not legally obtained in a way that would make them admissible in a criminal proceeding without some legal navigation, but they were extraordinarily useful in the civil case, and they were eventually reviewed by the district attorney's office, which took an interest in the elder financial abuse statutes. Daniel did not go to trial. He negotiated. The terms of that negotiation included full restitution to Nan's estate, plus interest, a civil judgment that would follow him for the foreseeable financial future, and a plea agreement on a reduced charge that nonetheless put his name in a category of things that could not be undone. He called me once, during this period. He said I had destroyed the family. I thought about Nan on her bedroom floor. I thought about 4 days. I thought about an empty glass and missed medications and a porch light that wasn't on. "You did that," I said, and I hung up. I went back to Alaska in February. By then, Nan had her home health aide back, her prescription service reinstated, the house cleaning resumed, and a medical alert device she wore in her wrist that connected directly to my phone. She had also, in a move that delighted me completely, signed up for a watercolor class at the senior center on Tuesday afternoons. She showed me photos of her paintings over video call every Sunday, the same time we had always talked. The Sunday before I flew back north, we sat together on the front porch in the cold, wrapped in quilts, in those 2 rocking chairs my grandfather had built. It was a clear day. The oak trees were bare, and the sky was a particular shade of pale blue that only happens in winter, like the color had been washed clean. "He knew," Nan said after a while. I looked at her. "Your grandfather. He knew something might happen." She was quiet for a moment. "He never said it directly to me. He didn't want to worry me, but the way he did things, the way he set everything up, he knew." I thought about a man who had spent his retirement building rocking chairs and establishing trusts and installing recording devices and giving his granddaughter a lawyer's phone number, just in case. a man who looked carefully and practically and with a long view. He trusted you, Nan said. She reached over and put her hand on mine. He always said you were the one who paid attention? A cardinal landed on the feeder at the edge of the porch, the same feeder my grandfather had hung there 15 years ago. Nan smiled at it the way she smiled at things she considered good signs. I stayed until the sun went down. Then I went inside and started packing for Alaska, carrying with me something that was harder to name than grief and lighter than it too. The feeling of having been exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to do, for someone who deserved nothing less.